Buying a car off Craigslist. When I was 17, I'm looking to buy my first car. I was on Craigslist every single day, wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a beater car that could get me from point A to point B. My budget was $3,000 at most. So the cars I was looking at were no newer than 2004. I found an ad one day for a 2002 two-door Honda Accord. It was listed for $2,000 and the mileage was under 80,000, so right away I knew I wanted to check it out. The person who posted the ad lived a few towns over from us, a 20-minute drive on the highway. I convinced my mom to drive me out there to view the car. After conversing with the guy over the phone, originally I texted him asking for details, but he ended up calling me. He sounded basically normal over the phone, actually rather polite. He answered some questions I had about the car and whatnot, and when he asked for my name and I told him Dan, he said, "Dan, what a great name, that's my name too." I laughed because it was the polite thing to do, but I just found it to be such an odd comment. Like everything about it, it almost sounded like he forgot his name was Dan because of the pause between "what a great name" and "that's my name." It just sounded sketchy. Nevertheless, everything else about the call went fine. So the next day my mom drove me to the address the guy gave me, getting off the highway and onto the streets right away. We agreed this was a trashy looking neighborhood, bars on windows, graffiti under bridges. I was hoping the guy's place wouldn't seem equally sketchy, but as we pulled up it wasn't a standard property like the rest in the area. The entrance to the property was between two houses. It wasn't a driveway, just some low-key road that led into an inlet with two more houses. Every house was cramped between other houses and buildings, but there I saw it, the Honda Accord, which was in my guess what you'd call the driveway for this house. My mom and I stepped up to the front door and rang the bell. We didn't know if it rang or not because we couldn't hear anything, so I knocked. One of the windows opened out of nowhere and a man's voice said to come inside. The door's unlocked. I went to open the door and my mom stopped me and whispered, "Are you sure you want to go in there?" I said yeah. I let ourselves in, expecting to be greeted by Dan. The inside of this place was kind of dark, not a lot of natural light came in through the minimal windows. "Hello," I said. "Yeah, over here," a voice called. It was a deeper voice than I heard on the phone. Then I asked, "Yeah," he said. I began walking through the little kitchen closer to his voice. My mom grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She whispered in my ear, "We're leaving." The man's voice now came from beyond this door at the end of the kitchen. He called up, "Down here, we could do the transaction here." My mom and I left the house in a hurry. As we were hurrying to my car, a lady at the next building over called to us. She came hurrying down from her front porch, warning us not to go in there. Then she asked why we were there, and we explained that I came to buy a car but that he was calling us into his basement. The woman said that she's been concerned about that man living next door for months, that she thinks he's up to no good and that he constantly has random cars pull up in the driveway in the middle of the night. We asked if his name was Dan. She said she wasn't sure, but that she remembered the guy introducing himself as Mike. She told us to just get far away from the house immediately, and so we did. It's disturbing to know my mom and I may have been murdered in that basement if we went down there. Like, how could we do a transaction before even viewing the car or agreeing on anything? Better question, why in the basement? The whole thing screams trap. I don't know what else he could have wanted to do to us, more specifically me, in that basement. Chris and his family had just bought a new TV. They were thinking of just throwing their old one away. Chris's older brother, John, suggested their dad, Rick, that they could sell the old TV on Craigslist to make some easy cash. Since the family never used Craigslist, John said he could set up the ad for him, since John's girlfriend used Craigslist before. So John put up an image of the TV with the description, used 55-inch Samsung 4K TV for $200. He also put Rick's phone number, so if anyone was interested, they could just call or text him. A week later, Rick got a call from a guy who introduced himself as Toby, and he said he was interested in the TV and wanted to know if he could come by the house at 10 o'clock that same night to pick it up. Rick said sure, and he sent Toby his address later that night. While Rick, Chris, and John waited outside the house for Toby to come so they could help him load the TV into his car, Rick got a call from Toby, and he said he wouldn't be able to make it to the house because he was almost out of gas, so he and Rick agreed to meet in the parking lot of a Circle. After Rick got off the phone, Chris and John loaded the TV in the back of Rick's pickup truck and they took off to the Circle K, where Toby said he was at, which was 15 miles away from the house. When they got there, they pulled up in a parking space next to the gas pumps where Toby was filling up his car, a black Nissan Altima. A few minutes later, a tall, heavy-set, bald guy with a goatee walked over to Rick's truck and said Toby told Rick that since the TV was big it would most likely not be able to fit in his car, so he suggested that they could just follow him back to his house, and Rick agreed with him. After a few minutes of driving on the main highway, they got onto a back road, which looked sketchy because it was nothing but trees on either side of the road, and it was filled with potholes. Toby texted Rick and said his house was at the end of the road. When they got to the end, the place that was supposedly Tom's house didn't even look like a house at all. It looked more like a tall abandoned house building when they got out of the truck. Toby told them to untie the TV from the back so they could start unloading it. After they untied the TV, they turned around and saw 3 large men emerge from the back of the car, and they all pulled out guns, including Toby threatened to kill them if they didn't give them all they had on them. Rick, Chris, and John didn't hesitate, so they all gave the guys their wallets and phones, and they obviously took the TV too. After taking everything they had, the guys got back in the car and drove away. When Rick, Chris, and John got home, Chris and John told their mom everything that went down, and Rick called the cops and told them the whole story and even gave them the license plate number from the car since he memorized it. To this day, Chris's family has never heard of any arrest being made. That was the one and only time the family ever used Craigslist. Back in 2012, when Craigslist was more popular, I'd say my house was broken into and robbed. A bunch of things were stolen, like 2 TVs, my Xbox 360, all of my video games, my hockey skates, and whatever stray cash I had laying around. I had the police come investigate the house, but nothing that would help track the perpetrator, including fingerprints, was found. I gave them a list of everything that was stolen, but the cops in my county usually suck, and they didn't help at all. Now I had to replace everything that was stolen. Believe it or not, the most costly thing to replace would be the video game collection. But I was starting with the replacement TVs. I went to Craigslist and there was an ad that was posted earlier that day for a 40-inch Panasonic TV for a low price. Panasonic was the brand I had, so I contacted the seller and drove to his house that night. He let me into his disgusting home and reeked, and the stains in the carpets and general messiness of the place didn't help. He brought me to this back room where the TV was. I examined it, and it was the exact TV that I had in my living room that was stolen. Then I started to look around the room and I noticed another smaller TV that was tucked in the corner of the room, as well as an Xbox. The smaller TV looked exactly like my other TV that was stolen. I went to pick up the Xbox and check the bottom of it for this specific long scratch in the case that mine had, and there it was. That was my Xbox. That was all of my. I looked at the guy who had a confused look on his face and I said, "Dude, you're the piece of that stole my stuff." His expression changed. He played dumb and had an angry tone. Now, he told me to get out of his house and lifted his shirt, exposing his gun holster. I live in Texas, so he likely had a license to carry. I left the house and called the cops. They arrived to the scene, but the man wouldn't let them, and he insisted they get a warrant and claimed that I was harassing him. I told the cops about my police report and the robbery and everything. They said they wouldn't be able to get a search warrant until the next day. I regretted not getting pictures while inside the room, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the moment. I was furious and I didn't know what to do. But that night, while I was getting ready for bed and doing research about search warrants, lawyers, and different possible outcomes to this situation, I heard a window break downstairs. Immediately I knew it was him. Following my instincts, I climbed out of my window and down to the small ledge under my window. From there I jumped to the ground and ran to my neighbor's house. My neighbor let me in while I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I handed the police my spare house key I had hidden on the side of the house, and they investigated the house again. Guns drawn this time, and inside they found him hidden under my bed. If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. When I said earlier that cops usually suck, yeah, this was the one time I actually loved cops here. And yes, it was the man who posted the Craigslist ad. He actually broke into my house to kill me that night as he had his gun on him. And why else would he be hiding under my bed? That doesn't sit well with me. Even to this day, he was found guilty of breaking and entering with intent to commit murder beyond a reasonable doubt and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Even still, I moved to a new town and changed my number. I tried to strip any possible trail that could lead that man to me when he gets out, and I'm sure he's out by now for alleged good behavior. That's the part that scares me the most. All of this over less than $1,000 worth of items. It actually makes me sick. I think Craigslist is one of the most dangerous places on the internet you could go.